Hello and welcome to Missouri Legislative Update. This month we bring you our program from the Senate Lounge, located on the 3rd floor in the Missouri State Capitol. In this month's show, we take a look at several hot-button issues moving through the legislative process. I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives.
And reporting from the Missouri Senate, I'm Jennifer Yable. It's here in the Senate Lounge where lawmakers consider legislation that ranges from protections for consumers in the Show Me State to how to boost our state's economy. And it's here that one of the upper chamber's priorities for this legislative session was considered before a panel of senators moved the bill to the full Senate for debate. Senate Bill 592, which would make changes to the Missouri Human Rights Act and address employment discrimination in the state, was sent to the House of Representatives early on in the legislative session. Bill supporters say the legislation would bring certainty to employment law in the state and help the legislature get Missourians back to work. Those against the measure say it would push back years of worker protections and take away certain rights found in the Missouri Human Rights Act. During Senate floor debate, several lawmakers agreed that Senate Bill 592 didn't veer too far from a pro-jobs bill passed by the legislature last year, which received the governor's veto.
You really haven't changed it that much of what the governor's office said in his veto letter that he said were the problems of why he vetoed it. So, you know me, I just kind of think, well, I don't know what different result you're going to get.
While this bill is still under consideration on the other side of the building, a similar House bill was recently vetoed by the governor, citing the legislation would have reversed decades of worker protection acts in Missouri. Senator John Lamping of Ladue says the legislation disapproved by the governor, if brought before lawmakers again, would have the votes in the Senate to receive a veto override.
It's very easy to vilify and talk about taking away these rights, or you're introducing the ability to discriminate. And that's just nonsense. The fact that it's so complicated and hard to understand for the average citizen, it's easy to vilify, but point of fact is that what we've done in Missouri is we have made it more and more costly to employ someone. And what this bill is attempting to do, as well as the workers' comp bill is attempting to do, is to reduce the cost of the employer to employ someone. And as a result, if it's less expensive for me to employ somebody in the total cost, then I'm more likely to hire more people.
The governor also lent his veto to another measure, Senate Bill 572. The bill addresses protections for co-employees who are at risk of personal lawsuits for their role in honest accidents at work, among other provisions. The state's workers' compensation law also provides certain benefits to workers who have been injured on the job or been exposed to occupational disease as a result of their job. Senate Bill 572 would make occupational diseases exclusively covered under Missouri's workers' compensation law, including toxic exposure that causes health-related illness or death to workers. During Senate floor debate, the Senate Minority Floor Leader addressed his concern relating to this provision, as well as an employee's claim for permanent total disability benefits.
We as a body have to deal with this issue of, are we cutting off some worker by creating such a high standard, which the business community wants an incredibly high standard of negligence in all of these cases, to where we are leaving somebody who dies of mesothelioma and their families with a $10,000 burial fee.
However, Senator Lamping says these pro-business bills, Senate Bill 592 and 572, would provide economic development Missouri needs to help businesses create a foundation to build and expand.
Our business community, if we can get these bills over with an override, our business community, their foundation just became more solid, more firm, and we're confident that it's just one more good reason why they're poised to go forward and to expand their private sector employment.
A two-thirds majority in both chambers is needed to override a governor's veto. The Senate successfully voted to override the governor's veto on Senate Bill 572 in late March.
The General Assembly truly agreed and finally passed two pieces of legislation intended to create a better business climate in the state of Missouri. However, Governor Nixon decided to veto both pieces of legislation. Senate Bill 572 made changes to the state's workers' compensation laws. Under the proposal, occupational diseases and co-employee liability cases would be taken care of under the state's workers' compensation laws. House Bill 1219 changed Missouri's employment law to mirror federal regulations. The legislation was intended to protect employers from excessive lawsuits. The Speaker of the House claims he won't try to override either of the vetoes, but is prepared to work with the governor to find a solution on both issues.
It's unfortunate that he vetoed them, but I said at the press conference right before we went on break that I look forward to working with the governor if he made that decision. So,
despite not having the votes to override the governor, Tilley claims there is still plenty of time left in the current legislative session to address both issues. The Missouri House approved its version of the state's 2013 operating budget. 13 appropriation bills make up the state's $24 billion budget. The Missouri House approved its version of the state's $24 billion operating budget. 13 appropriation bills make up the state's 2013 budget. The House's budget adds more than $5 million to the Elementary and Secondary Education Foundation formula. However, Democrats claim the House can do better when it comes to education.
Although we've made great distributions, or I should say, we've made decisions about money that is available, it's not as good as we can do.
Despite pleas for more money from the minority, the House funds elementary and secondary education at a record level.
We are more than meeting our constitutional requirement of spending 25% of the state's budget on education. And last time I looked, I believe we've held that line firmly in the mid-30s, 32, 33% of the budget.
Under Governor Nixon's proposed budget, higher education suffers a more than $100 million cut. The House's budget restores the cut and funds higher education at the 2012 level. According to the House Budget Chairman, restoring higher education was the House's #1 priority.
If you continue to cut away and cut away and cut away at higher education, before long you start cutting into your educated workforce. If you don't have an educated workforce, how are you ever going to dig out of a depressed economy? So we felt it was very important to fund that, and we found a way to do it.
In order to restore the cut to higher education, lawmakers had to cut more than $25 million from a health care program designed for blind people. The minority leader claims the cut represents the biggest problem with the 2013 proposed budget.
The fact of the matter is, at some point we got to get away from this idea that we're going to pit two things that are worthwhile in this state. We do it with children and we do it with veterans. We do it with education and we do it with development. We do it now with the blind and higher education, or elementary and secondary education, because those were the two areas that you could cut money from to give back to the blind.
Lawmakers approved all 13 of the budget bills with little opposition. The budget now heads to the Senate for consideration. Overall, the Speaker claims he was pleased with the budget process and proud of the House's finished product.
we passed a $24 billion budget that I think invests in the priorities that the average Missourian believes in. We balanced the state budget, we held the line on taxes, and we were able to fund higher education at about $100 million more than what the governor recommended.
Lawmakers must truly agree and finally pass the state's 2013 budget by the May 11th constitutional deadline. The Missouri House approved a priority piece of legislation aiming to provide the state with more than $50 million. Lawmakers claim this legislation is crucial to balancing the state's 2013 budget. The Missouri House approved a proposal aiming to provide the state with more than $50 million for the state's 2013 budget. House Bill 1030 would provide a tax amnesty period for taxpayers. Under the proposal, taxpayers must pay their unpaid taxes between August 1st and October 31st of 2012 to avoid any penalties associated with their unpaid taxes.
This year results in a $52 million in additional revenue to the state, which otherwise we would not get in fiscal 13.
Governor Nixon's proposed budget is partly based off of House Bill 1030. The budget chair claims the proposal is vital to the upcoming budget.
The whole purpose of this bill is to provide about $70 million worth of revenue for the current fiscal, or the 2013 fiscal budget. This was included as part of the governor's recommendation and state of the state. He built his projections on it. We are building our projections on it as well.
Lawmakers approved the proposal without any opposition and sent it to the Senate for consideration.
Missouri senators advance a plan that could change retirement for future state employees and elected officials. Senate Communications correspondent Dean Morgan takes a closer look.
Senate Bill 492 would modify retirement benefits for new members of the Missouri General Assembly and statewide elected officials, and would modify interest paid on retirement refunds. Senator Jason Crowell of Cape Girardeau, who sponsors the measure, says the goal is to reduce the number of different retirement plans currently offered by the state.
One of the issues that crept up and for discussion was, why do we have special retirement systems for different types of state workers? And I would respectfully submit to you, Mr. President, that it's not right.
During debate, Senate Minority Floor Leader Victor Callahan of Independence asked about the different retirement plans.
I know that the judges have a separate retirement.
Right.
I know that we have a separate retirement, that members of General Assembly, then there's state employees, then the Highway Department, is that correct? The State Highway Patrol, the Water Patrol.
Senator Crowell also says this goes back to changes made to state employee pensions 2 years ago.
And the aim of this legislation is to put in place one retirement system for all state workers, whether they be state workers that hold statewide office, state workers that serve in the Missouri Senate or Missouri General Assembly, or statewide or state workers that serve in the judiciary, or state workers that do the frontline work of state government each and every day.
Senator Joseph Kevney of St. Louis adds he's worried that people won't want to work for the state or run for office under this proposal.
We're in a situation where we're going to have a hard time recruiting people for these positions. And I'm more concerned with the General Assembly and with the judicial branch. And when we start reducing some of these fringe benefits without some corresponding increase in salary or some promise in salary, I get very, very concerned.
Senate Bill 492 is now in the Missouri House for consideration. Final approval in that chamber would send the measure to the governor's desk for his signature. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Dean Morgan.
After the break, we'll take a look at how the House plans to address funding for certain veterans programs, and a bill in the Senate that would change how Missouri's corrections, probation, and parole system operates. That and more up next on Missouri Legislative Update.
Every year, mothers lose their babies to gun crimes. You'll always be your mother's baby. So before you commit a gun crime, think about who you'll leave behind. Gun crimes hit home.
If a natural disaster happened and we were outside the home, we would probably all meet, I'll say, around the grocery store, you know.
We would all meet at a bus stop. That is our meeting place.
Well, we would probably just meet out in front of the house.
We'd probably meet at our neighbor's house.
If you have no plan, then you can just plan what to do as it happens.
Welcome back. Lawmakers approved a proposal changing the way veterans programs are funded in the state. The bipartisan bill received glowing endorsements from members on both sides of the aisle. The Missouri House approved a proposal changing the way lottery and gaming funds are distributed. The bill aims to find a new funding source for veterans programs. The approved legislation would dedicate more of the state's lottery prize money to education, which would free up casino gaming revenue for the state's veterans' homes. Currently, there is a waiting list of more than 1,700 people waiting to get into a veterans' home. The sponsor of the proposal claims this bill will end a struggle between two important groups of people.
The bottom line with this bill is, one, it will end the ongoing fight between early childhood and veterans for their funding, which both sides really, really want.
Supporters state the bill means more than $30 million for veterans. The legislation reduces the state's lottery prize pool to fund the increase to early childhood education. And the other side of the aisle agrees. This bill is a win for all involved.
So we're going to have two winners in your bill. We're going to have no losers. Veterans are going to win, early childhood is going to win, and Missouri Access is going to win. Actually, that's three. I just counted three. So we're going to have three winners in this bill as opposed to a winner and a loser.
Lawmakers approved the Republican priority legislation without any opposition. The bill now heads to the Senate for consideration.
The Senate recently approved legislation that would reform the adoption process in Missouri. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore has more on Senate Bill 711, a measure currently under consideration in the House.
Lawmakers in the upper chamber unanimously approved Senate Bill 711, legislation that would modify provisions relating to adoption proceedings in the state of Missouri. The act simply states that an adoptive child's race or ethnicity cannot be used as a considering factor when determining the child's placement with adoptive parents. Senator John Lamping of Ladue says he sponsored the measure because of a real-life experience regarding how long the adoption process takes. He believes the process could be sped up if courts did not look at the race or ethnicity of an adoptive child or adoptive parents when determining the final home placement.
Certain courts take a tremendous amount of latitude, and as a result of that, in my opinion, it extends the period of time that a child remains in foster care. And my hope is to try to shorten that period of time, ensure the fact that that adopted child ends up in a wonderful home, but not to have that process be delayed.
The bill was welcomed with broad support from both sides of the aisle, and several senators had questions regarding the adoption process.
I guess one of my questions that I have is, what is our State Department doing, our state doing in terms of allowing these kids to go into homes where the race is different?
I've heard, maybe it's a fallacy, maybe it isn't, that people go to international adoption because the process is a lot, it gets expedited faster than if you would try to adopt somebody from our country. And I don't know if that's true or not.
I think what you brought forth is a very important point, and I just want to thank you and support you absolutely 100%. And hopefully over the next few years, we can move the ball a little further down the road.
Senator Lamping, who is an adoptive parent, also sponsors several other bills dealing with the adoption process this legislative session. Last year, he sponsored a measure that was signed into law, which helps adoptees have better access to their biological parents' information.
I came down here looking for all the ways we could to get more orphans into adoptive parents' homes. There's not a long history of people trying to do that down here.
The Senate also approved a measure, Senate Bill 699, that could change the way the state's corrections and probation and parole system operates. The Justice Reinvestment Act is the result of work done by two different groups: the state's bipartisan working group on sentencing and corrections, made up of lawmakers, judges, and other state officials, and a separate task force of victims advocates, prosecutors, public defenders, and law enforcement. The data produced by the two groups' work last year showed Missouri's spending for departments of corrections, probation, and parole was increasing, but the recidivism rate was not dropping. This session, lawmakers are working to pass a possible solution to the problem by increasing safety and decreasing the costs in the current system. Senator Jack Goodman of Mount Vernon sponsors the legislation.
As we went through this data-driven process, and really some data that was called to our attention to start this process, we've seen that Missouri's been spending a lot more on sentencing and corrections, but we haven't been getting a better result for the Missouri taxpayers' dollars.
Senate Bill 699 would provide swift and certain sanctions for people who violate the conditions of their probation and parole, faster hearings in front of a judge, and a mandatory placement in 120-day prison shock programs for some offenders. Most of the debate in the Senate centered on how much county jails would be reimbursed for housing prisoners during shock time.
As I understand it, what you've done in this bill is you've come up with $30 a day.
I would expect that an urban or suburban county is more likely to have a higher cost than a smaller county. I don't know if that's correct.
The safeguard's still there that the Missouri General Assembly will dictate and determine the portion of GR which will go to reimburse the county governments.
Senate Bill 699 would also create a 13-member commission to oversee the new law's implementation and to calculate the effects of its operation. The bill has been approved by the Senate and is now working its way through the House. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
Interstate 70, the major highway connecting St. Louis to Kansas City, is in need of major repairs. But with the state short of funds to pay for the project, lawmakers are examining other ways to generate the revenue, including tolls, a proposal that has sparked fierce debate. Senate Communications' Daniel Clote has more.
Interstate 70 is used daily by thousands of people and is critical to the flow of transportation in and through Missouri. And now, that highway is crumbling. MoDOT officials claim much of I-70 needs to be rebuilt, a project that would cost anywhere from $2 to $4 billion, money the state doesn't have. Senator Ryan McKenna of Crystal City acknowledges the funding problem during a Senate Transportation Committee hearing.
The formula that MoDOT works with is set up to fail the way it's currently with the lowest gas tax, one of the lowest gas tax in the nation, one of the lowest sales tax in our surrounding states, the number of road miles that MoDOT has, the number of bridges that MoDOT has, and the expense of bridges compared to road miles, go on about that.
Now, some officials are looking at toll roads as a possible solution. Senate Bill 752, sponsored by Senator Mike Kehoe of Jefferson City, would authorize the Missouri Highway and Transportation Committee to form a public-private partnership with private companies to finance, develop, and operate I-70 as a toll road. Senator Kehoe says he doesn't necessarily support tolls, but the state needs to examine all the options available.
Tolls or user fees are another option that we have to talk about, and I believe that it's responsible for us we know there's a problem, and as elected officials we should talk about all the solutions, even if some of them aren't popular, and I think this is just one of the evils, but it is definitely an option on how to fund it. Is it the right one? I don't know. We're going to hear a lot about both sides of that today, but I'm with the chairman that we need to look at something. We can't just keep letting this problem get worse.
Tolls are estimated to cost 10 to 15 cents per mile for a car and up to 3 times that for a truck. Using the lowest amount, an average citizen would pay about $25 to travel from St. Louis to Kansas City. Senate Bill 752 needs to be approved by the Transportation Committee before the full Senate can debate the measure. Lawmakers are under pressure to find a funding option soon. Interstate 70 was only built to last 30 years. It turns 60 this year. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Daniel Clote.
The Missouri House approved a proposal aiming to help the state's top cash crop. Supporters claim the legislation aims to help almost all aspects of the state's agricultural industry.
This is for the normal everyday producer out there.
The Missouri House approved a proposal aiming to help out the state's #1 industry. House Bill 1212 allows any vehicle hauling ag products, livestock, or milk weighing up to 85,500 pounds the ability to travel on any Missouri highway. Currently, trucks hauling ag goods can only go up to the weight limit on 4 Missouri highways. The sponsor claims his proposal gives Missouri farmers the same opportunities as their neighboring farmers.
Currently in Missouri law, there's 4 highways in the state of Missouri where people can haul livestock and agriculture products at 85.5. It just makes sense that if it's good in 4 roads in northwest Missouri, it's good in the other roads in southeast, southwest, and northeast.
The legislation does not apply to interstates. Opponents claim the legislation is a power play by the ag and trucking industry.
The trucking industry and the big, huge CAFOs are asking my constituents to have worse roads so they can haul cheaper. That is rent-seeking. If you do not like socialist government, then you should not vote for this amendment.
Despite claims the proposal will have a negative effect on the state's infrastructure, Smith claims the bill is about putting Missouri farmers on an equal playing field.
This bill will allow us to have a strong competitive advantage with our neighboring states where the weight limitations are at 85.5 or higher.
The Missouri House approved the ag bill with more than 110 yes votes. The bill now heads to the Senate for consideration. Up next on Missouri Legislative Update, the Senate aims to find new ways to help the state's bottom line. And the Missouri House honors a Kansas City legend. That and more after the break on Missouri Legislative Update.
The first step to getting into college is finding someone who can help. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
So, are you going out tonight? I can't. My parents say I have to be home right after work. That's so gay. Totally gay.
Ugh, that is so Emma and Julia.
Why are you saying that's so Emma and Julia?
Well, you know when something is dumb or stupid, you say that's so Emma and Julia.
Who says that?
Everyone. Imagine if who you are were used as an insult. When you say that's so gay, do you realize what you say? Knock it off.
Underneath everything we are all people.
And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
Welcome back to Missouri Legislative Update. Senate leaders created a new special committee to examine certain aspects of several social services offered to Missouri citizens. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore has more about the work of the Senate Special Committee on Social Service Program Savings.
You've got a tough job ahead of you. I hope I can be helpful.
The newly created Special Committee on Social Service Program Savings met for the first time in early March to hear testimony from the National Conference of State Legislatures and the Department of Social Services. The committee is responsible for conducting hearings in order to examine past and projected changes in the participation and cost of each social service program offered in Missouri. Committee Chairman Senator Rob Schaaf of St. Joseph outlined his plans for how the new committee would operate.
We're not going to be like meeting for the purpose of like we're going to block grant that program or we're going to eliminate that program, but we're going to ask questions like, what if we did block grant it? What would be the effect? How many people would be affected? How would they be affected? How much money could we save? That kind of stuff.
The committee is further charged with studying possible structural changes of each program, including program elimination, changes to federal funding, eligibility, new programs coordinated with the federal government, and any other program changes designed to reduce cost. The committee plans to meet regularly as session continues. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
Speaker Steve Tilley inducted Kansas City baseball legend Buck O'Neil into the Hall of Famous Missourians. Lawmakers were joined by representatives from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and other baseball officials to welcome Buck into the state capitol's hallowed hall. Speaker Stephen Tilley was joined by baseball officials, lawmakers, and others as he inducted Buck O'Neil into the Hall of Famous Missourians. Buck played more than 10 seasons for the Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro American Baseball League, a career highlighted by several All-Star appearances and a Negro League World Series championship. Following his playing days, Buck managed the Kansas City Monarchs for 8 years and later became the first African-American coach in Major League Baseball history. Buck never made it to the Baseball Hall of Fame, despite a career lasting longer than 7 decades. In the eyes of one Kansas City great, Buck's rightful place is in the Hall of Famous Missourians.
Today, I really believe Buck has finally made his Hall of Fame because to me, the best recognition you can get is a recognition in your city, in your state, and I think this is Buck's Hall of Fame tonight, being inducted into the Hall of Famous Missourians.
Many believe Buck's hard work off the field helped ensure that the story of the Negro Leagues will always be a part of baseball history. To those who knew him, Buck's life was a lesson for all.
We're losing some of these generations now, these folks that came through difficult trials and still came out on the other end whole. They loved people, they would put others' needs before their own. We need to begin to instill this kind of lesson in our young people.
Buck joins the likes of Stan Musial and Walter Cronkite in the Hall of Famous Missourians. And that's our show for this month. If you have any questions regarding anything going on in the Missouri House, you can visit our website at www.house.mo.gov. I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives.
And if you have any questions about the legislation or committees in the Senate that appeared in this program, please visit www.senate.mo.gov. There you'll find the contact information for the 34 members of the Missouri Senate, as well as a link to the Senate's newsroom website. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next month on Missouri Legislative Update.